Listen closer. Do you hear that? Who are you?
Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the first episode of Apocalypse Signal, and I am your host, Naeim. Believe it or not, it's totally up to you, but there are some stories that have never been told. Whispers of true fear lost in the noise of the world. Our purpose is to listen to these whispers and reveal what it tells us. A sudden chill when you are alone, the feeling of being watched, that isn't your imagination. That's the moment you realize you are not alone. And that's exactly what our first episode is about. The story was sent to us by Isabella. She collected the story from her friend's grandfather. The family in this story want to be remain anonymous, so I'll be using different names for everyone involved here. I'm going to read it exactly as it was written by Isabella. Now, let's begin the story. Our story begins in 1975 in a remote and forgotten part of St. Martin Parish, Louisiana, a place of humid air and deep shadows. In this isolated area lived a man named Silas Blackwood. He lived with his wife and his three sons, Alice, John, and Carl. Alice, the eldest, he was 35 and John was nearly 30. His two oldest sons were married and for a time they all lived together as one large sprawling family under a single roof. But peace in a family that large is a fragile thing. A bitter rift grew between Silas and his older son's wives, a poison that eventually forced him to make a choice. Silas and his wife took their youngest son Carl and exiled themselves to a plot of forgotten land the family had owned for years. It was an island in a sea of fields, surrounded on all four sides by miles of open farmland. It wasn't a village or even a proper settlement. The closest neighbor was a 10 to 15-minute walk away across the dirt tracks. It was a single homestead in the middle of nowhere where they built three houses, a large house, a medium one, and a small one. Their new home was on the outskirts of the main community, like its own small, isolated world. For a time, they were doing well. During this period, a baby girl was born, bringing a new light into the Blackwood house. They lovingly named her Sarah. A short while later, Silas' youngest son Carl secured a position as a government employee, which placed him in the city of Baton Rouge. After getting the job, Carl proposed the woman he loved and married her. A few months later, Carl left his new wife in the care of his parents and went back to his workplace. In the main house, Silas lived with his wife Tracy, their daughter Sarah, and Carl's wife Abigail. The medium-sized house was reserved for when Carl came home to visit, a private space for him and his new wife. 1975 to 1979. For 4 years, life on the isolated homestead was peaceful. They faced no significant problems, but that peace was shattered on the night of 23rd August 1979, when a terrible incident occurred. It was on that night that distant neighbors looked out across the dark fields and saw the Blackwood house burning. The locals rushed to help, but by the time they reached the property, the main house already been consumed by the inferno. When the flames died down, they found 4 bodies laying in the scorched ruins. Strangely, the other 2 buildings on the property stood completely untouched by the fire. By morning, the police had arrived to take the bodies for an autopsy. The youngest son, Carl, rushed home from Baton Rouge to the devastating news that his parents, his little sister, and his beloved wife were all gone. As the relatives tried to comfort the grief-stricken young man, the incident took a dark and unexpected turn. The doctor's examination revealed a horrifying truth. The family hadn't died in the fire. They had all been murdered before the blaze was set. Suspicion immediately fell upon Carl's 2 older brothers, Alice and John. It was their bitter family arguments, after all, that had driven their parents into this isolated stretch of land. The police took both brothers into custody that very day. After the autopsies were complete, the bodies of the family were returned and buried in a graveyard. That night, the grieving son, Carl, stayed alone in the same guest house he used to stay with his wife. For the next few days, an eerie silence fell over the property. No one saw Carl anywhere. After 4 or 5 days had passed, neighbors began to notice a terrible smell of decay in the air. Tracing the source of the smell, they were led directly to the door of Carl's house. They could tell the awful smell was coming from inside, but the house was sealed shut from within. After calling out and hearing no response, they broke down the door. The sight that greeted them inside was horrifying. It was the decomposing body of Carl laying in the silent room. The police were immediately called back to the property. The police returned and sent Carl's body for an autopsy. The results only deepened the mystery. Carl had been murdered, strangled like the others, but the crucial and impossible fact remained. The door of the house had been locked from inside. There was no sign of a forced entry, and no way for a killer to have escaped. During the investigation, police found one strange and recurring clue from both crime scenes. The handprints of the killer were unnaturally large, far bigger than any normal human. Yet, Carl's brothers Alice and John both were still in police custody. So, who killed Carl and who killed the rest of the family? Even after a long investigation, the police could find no earthly answers. While the two brothers were eventually found guilty in court based on their motive, they never confessed, but the real mystery of the murders was never truly solved. To find that truth, we must look beyond the evidence of this world. Dear listeners, 23rd of August became a date marked by dread for the local community. Every year on that night, a phantom fire would be seen raging on the abandoned Blackwood property, a silent reminder of the original tragedy. It was because of this yearly spectacle that the local gave the area its name, the Burnt House, a name it is still known by today. 13 years later, in 1992, a middle-aged farmer from the area named Earl, he was working on his land. During the long rainy season when the fields were flooded, he would try to make a living by catching fish and selling them. That year, his two cousins, Dale and Cletus, came to stay with him from the city. Dale was 25 and Cletus was 22. They hatched a plan to get through the season. They would run a small duck farm by day and at night slip out onto the dark water to fish from their boat under the cover of the thick bayou mist. Their new routine began according to plan. Every day the three men took care of the duck farm, and every night they went out fishing together. For a while everything was going well. But one night after dinner, a strange feeling came over to Earl. He decided he would not go to fishing that night. Something just didn't feel right about it. However, it was a full moon. Dale and Cletus pleaded, Earl, brother, it's a full moon. We will catch more fish tonight than any others. Please, let's go. Earl still didn't want to go, but at their insistence, he reluctantly agreed. All the while, a small voice in the back of his mind kept repeating that they would be in trouble. He tried to understand the source of the feeling, but he couldn't. Despite of his instincts, Earl went with them, and soon they were riding their boat into the dark bayou to fish. Just as his cousins predicted, the fishing was good, and soon everyone was happy. Caught up in the success of the night, in this brief moment of joy, Earl completely forgot about the terrible feeling that had plagued him earlier. Around 1 at night, their boat drifted near a small bridge about 3 miles deep into the bayou. Just as they were about to turn back, a sound cut through the quiet night. A crying voice of an old woman coming from somewhere above them on the bridge. Cletus looked up into the bridge and said, "Who in the hell is crying up there?" Dale shook his head and said, "Ain't our problem, let's go." But Earl couldn't leave it be. "You don't leave someone in trouble out here," Earl said firmly. "Both of you, go on up and see what's happened there." Dale and Cletus climbed the bank and saw a woman sitting by the bridge. In front of her was a coffin, and next to it, a dead body wrapped in a simple white cloth. She was crying over the body. Cletus cautiously asked the woman what had happened. The woman explained that her husband had died suddenly while they were visiting a relative's house. Some people helped her to move the body this far, but then they left her. The woman said, "My house is in a remote area near the burnt house." She pleaded, "How can I get there so late at night with this body?" She begged Dale and Cletus to help her to take her husband's body home, but they rejected her proposal right to her face. They said bluntly, "We don't take dead bodies on our boat," and told her to ask someone else and immediately come back down to Earl. When Earl asked what was going on, they told him everything. After listening, Earl was firm and he said, "You don't leave a woman in trouble out here. Her house is near the burnt house, and we're going that way anyway. We will help her." Even though Dell and Clattus argued against it, Earl insisted. He told them to go back up and bring the body down to the boat. Reluctantly, Dell and Clattus went to the top of the bridge and carried the body down to the boat. The woman sat at the very front of the boat as they pushed off into the darkness. The strange thing was, she wasn't crying anymore. Her head was bowed, her face and mouth completely covered by a long dark veil. Earl tried to ask her some questions, but the woman gave no answer. Occasionally, she would just point a finger, indicating which way the boat should go. Finally, when she spoke, her voice seemed strangely familiar to Earl, but he quickly dismissed the thought. She directed them to a patch of land with water on three sides and a single dirt road on the other. Even though Earl was local, he couldn't quite recognize the place in the dark, though it still felt familiar. After they pulled the boat ashore, an old woman and old man emerged from the house and took the body from them. They also seemed familiar to Earl. He was sure he had seen them somewhere before, but just couldn't place them. The woman who came from the house, she said, "You have gone to a lot of trouble for us. Thank you. Please, wait a moment. Let me bring you something for your help." Earl didn't want to take anything from them. He said, "We helped because she was in trouble. You don't need to give us anything." But the woman insisted on paying them. Hearing this, Dell and Clattus quickly agreed. The woman went inside the house, saying she would be right back with the money. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. After an hour gone, still no one had come out of the house. Earl said to his cousins, "This is the house of mourning. They are grieving. I think that's why they forgot. Come on, let's go." But Dell and Clattus were stubborn. Dell said, "We went to all this trouble. We are not leaving without our money." As they argued, Earl noticed something deeply unsettling. There was absolutely no sound coming from inside the house. It was Dell who finally said it. "Come on, brother, let's go inside." Although Earl was against it, he reluctantly agreed. They left Clattus by the boat and the two of them walked onto the property. They saw three structures like houses, one large, one medium, and one small. There was no light and no sound anywhere. A strange feeling of disbelief washed over them. It was then they thought they saw a faint light glowing from behind the main house. The two of them crept around the back and froze. They saw a burning funeral pyre, its flames crackling in the darkness. But there was no body on the pyre, but next to it there was a coffin and a body wrapped in a white cloth just beside it. Dale crept closer and dared to lift the white cloth from the body. The moment he saw the face, he staggered back and screamed, "Brother, that's her. That's the woman who was on our boat." Earl stared and a cold dread washed over him as he recognized the face. He whispered, "Oh my God, that's Tracy Blackwood, Silas Blackwood's wife. She died in 1979. And in that instant, everything clicked into place for Earl. The date, 23rd of August, it was the anniversary, the very night he had been so afraid of, but couldn't remember why. He understood now they were in terrible danger. Earl screamed, a raw sound of pure terror. He and Dale turned and ran as fast as they could. They scrambled back to the boat only to find that Cletus was gone. "Where did Cletus go?" Dale yelled, his voice cracking. They frantically searched the dark water and saw him. Cletus was floating face down in the murky bayou next to the boat. They knew immediately he was no longer on this earth. With another scream, Earl and Dale bolted, running down the dark road next to the property. Dale struggled to keep up, but Earl knew this path. He just ran, desperate to escape the horrors of that night. Earl ran until he reached a house in the neighboring village, where he collapsed in the yard with a scream. The sound woke up many people, and soon everyone came out of their homes. Earl frantically explained everything what had happened. As more people gathered, they all said the same thing with fearful tones. "Earl, don't you know what a night this is? How could you make such a mistake?" Then someone grabbed a flashlight, another lit a torch, and a search operation formed to find Dell and Gladys. They found Dell first, lying unconscious in a field. They carried him back to the house. Meanwhile, another group of villagers cautiously made their way to the haunted property. They saw that there were no houses, only the crumbling ruins of the old foundation. But Earl's boat was there, floating silently by the bank, and Clayton's body was in the water next to it, with large, dark fingerprints bruised deep into his neck, as if someone had strangled him and held him under. Dal woke up the next morning. When they asked what happened, his voice was a choked whisper. He said, "Last night, I was running behind Earl, following him. At the moment, I lost Earl. I was just running in whither direction my eyes were going. Suddenly, I ran into something and fell down. When I looked back to see what I had hit, I saw the woman from the coffin. She was standing right in front of me, but her feet weren't touching the ground. Smell of swamp mud and decay was all around her. Then a faint, gargling laugh came from her throat. At that moment, she slowly started coming toward me. After that, I don't remember anything." Dale was so terrified by the memory that he came down with a violent fever and his condition became worse. He died within a week. Are still alive to this day. Even now, people do not go to that part of the bayou, not even in the bright light of day. So many strange incidents happen there that locals refuse to work the fields near the property. For many years, the community held its breath on the night, 23 of August. The phantom fire would always return. The villagers shout help from spiritualists over the years, but the answer was always the same. A terrible, ancient evil had long claimed that land as its own. It allowed Silas Blackwood for 4 years of peace, never letting on that there was a problem. Then, exactly 4 years later, on that fateful night in 1979, the entity revealed itself, killing everyone in the family before setting the house on the fire. And the next night, it killed Silas' youngest son, Carl. Earl always believed the entity spared him because his intentions were pure, while his cousins Dell and Gladys were consumed by greed, and for that they paid with their lives. His theory was later confirmed by a local spiritualist who warned that whoever approaches that place with a dark heart will surely die. It is a grim reminder that for many years, the only thing that lit up the darkness on the property was the raging phantom fire. Finally, in 2002, a holy man was brought to that cursed land to confront the entity. He communed with the ancient power and demanded that it leave. The entity refused to depart, but it offered a promise. It would no longer interfere with the lives of humans under one condition. No one was to come near the property after nightfall. For this truth, however, peace had a price. A pure white god had to be sacrificed upon the soil, and a tribute of sweets made of milk and rice left behind in the darkness. The villagers, desperate for an end to the haunting, they fulfilled the grim conditions. When they led the white god to the center of the cursed soil, kept digging its hopes into the dirt, pulling back on the rope as if it could see something they couldn't. And so, after 2002, the phantom fire was never seen again, but the truth did not heal the land properly. A strange and stubborn barrenness took root in the soil, a sickness that remains to this day. Staple crops like wheat and corn will either and die before they can be harvested. Other plants like sugarcane might grow, but they yield only a small. The entity may have been pacified, but the ground itself remembers the evil it holds. Some scars never fade. An old, abandoned piece of land, forever cursed and now forever known as the burnt house. It's a truly terrifying story. Imagine for a moment, if you were in Earl's place on that boat, what would you have done? Even just reading this account, a chill ran down my spine. But the story of the burnt house does not end here. The evil on that land was simply waiting. Years later, another incident would add a new dark chapter to the legend. Okay, we're going to directly the second part of this episode. This incident takes place in 1983. It concerns a poor farmer named Joseph Monroe, a sharecropper from the small community of Bayou Black. To make a living, Joseph worked his own small plot of land as well as fields belonging to others with his tractor, which kept him busy from sunup to sundown. His own land was a patch that sat on the lonely outskirts of the old property known as the burnt house. Though it was a little ways from the actual ruins, he still had to work in the shadows of that haunted place every day. It was the middle of a busy planting season. On this particular day, Joseph was determined to finish cultivating his entire field. He was due on another property the next morning and didn't want to waste a long trip back for just a small amount of leftover work. He had his tractor and he decided he would stay until the job was done, no matter how late it got. Just as he did every day, he arrived at his land near the burnt house with his tractor. He started cultivating in the morning, trying to work as fast as he could. By his calculation, the amount of land he had left for tomorrow was small, but he couldn't stand the thought of making the long trip out there again. For just an hour or 2 hours of work, he would finish it all today, even if it took him past nightfall. He worked relentlessly from morning until noon and through the afternoon into the evening. But the job was still not done. It seemed he had miscalculated. There was still a small section left to plow. He had his son with him for the most of the day, but as twilight fell, he sent the boy home, telling him to not wait up as it might be a late night. His son left, leaving Joseph alone with his work. After dusk settled, Joseph fired up the tractor again. He had brought a flashlight, knowing it would be late, but there was also a bright moon hanging in the sky, bathing the fields in a pale, silvery light. He fell back into the rhythm of his work, the machine cutting through the quiet night. He was getting close to the end, maybe another 15 minutes and the job would be done. His 2 horses, which had been grazing peacefully nearby all the day, suddenly began to act strangely. Every time he passed them on the tractor, they would pull at their ropes and shift nervously. This had never happened before. It was clear they did not want to be in that place. He immediately shut off the tractor to check on his horses. As Joseph walked towards them, he felt something odd under his boots. The ground felt soft. At first, he couldn't make sense of it. He turned his head to look back at his path and noticed something impossible. The plowed earth where he had just driven the heavy tractor was completely undisturbed. It looked as if the machine had never even run there. Very strange, indeed. Despite the strange events, he went back to his horses, but at first glance, nothing seemed wrong with them. Confused, he returned to the tractor, turned the key and started driving. Instantly, the horses began to bellow again, a panicked, unnatural sound. They were peaceful only when he was standing near them. This time, their thrashing was far more violent than before. He immediately shut off the engine and went back to them. And just like before, the moment he was near, they fell silent. He examined the animals carefully, searching for any sign of injury or pain, but found nothing. He started the tractor again, and again the horses screamed. He began to reason with himself, thinking maybe they are just restless from being tied up all day, but he couldn't ignore the other strange detail. Every time he got off the tractor, the ground felt wrong under his feet, not like farm soil, but like something soft was buried just beneath the surface. The 4th time he got off the tractor, as the horses pulled wildly against their ropes, he felt that same soft spot give way slightly under his weight, and this time something new came with it. A putrid, rotten smell that seemed to rise up from the ground itself, clinging to him. Joseph, a brave and practical man, he thought, that's enough, what is this thing? I'm going to see what this is. Standing on that soft patch of soil, he decided to dig. He began scraping away the soil with his hands, and soon he felt something solid and round buried in the dirt. As he cleared more soil away, the shape became unmistakable. He realized with a surge of cold horror that it was a human head. When the soil was completely cleared, he dared to lift the head to see whose it was. He discovered it was a woman's head with long, matted hair. Then, with the courage that few people would possess, he decided to do something else. He used the water hose on his tractor to wash the dirt from its face, hoping that he might recognize it. As he cleaned away the grime, the face seemed hauntingly familiar. He felt like he had seen this person somewhere before, but he couldn't be certain. Some dirt was still caked on, and in the dim moonlight, the features were not completely clear. But then, suddenly, a terrible thing happened. The head's two eyes, which had been closed, just snapped open. As those eyes stared at him, Joseph's courage finally failed him, and he was completely overcome with fear. Not only did the eyes open, but the head then turned on its own, faced Joseph directly, and began to have a terrible laugh. A tremor of pure terror shot through Joseph's entire body. With all his strength, he threw the laughing head as far as he could. He then turned and ran blindly towards his house, praying to Jesus. Back in the field, his two horses remained, silent and still in the moonlight. He ran home with all his might, finally reaching the courtyard of his house. Before he fainted and fell unconscious, his family members rushed to his side and eventually were able to revive him. As soon as he regained his consciousness, he shakily shared the horrifying story with his family. Alarmed, the family members went out into the night to bring back his tractor and the two horses. When they got to the fields, they found the tractor sitting right where he had left it, but there was no sign of the animals. It was clear the horses had been there just a short while ago. Their hoofprints were stamped all over the ground, but the animals themselves had vanished. Thinking the horses might have broken loose and wandered nearby, they kept searching. The search eventually led them to the dreaded courtyard of the infamous burnt house property, and it was there they made a grisly discovery: the severed heads of their two horses. There were no other parts of the animal to be found, only the heads sitting in the dark with blood splattered all around. It was obvious this was not the work of any kind of predator. No animal on earth could sever a head so cleanly. It looked as if the heads had been perfectly removed from their bodies with something impossibly sharp. No one ever understood what happened to the rest of the horses' bodies. There were no tracks, no drag marks, nothing. It was as if they had just simply vanished into the night, leaving only the heads behind as a gruesome warning. The land kept its secrets, and no one was brave enough to go looking for answers. Joseph Monroe never farmed that land again. He sold his tractor and his field for a fraction of what they are worth, just to be rid of the place. He never fully recovered from what he saw that night in the moonlight. He became a quiet, withdrawn man, forever haunted by the memory of a laughing head and the horses that followed the ghost into the darkness. Another truly terrifying story with such a tragic outcome. I want to give a special thanks to Isabella for sending this compelling story to us. Isabella originally sent this story in a less organized way, so I had to piece them together before I could present them to you. Anyway, if you have a scary story of your own, please feel free to send it to our email. It's possible that your story could be the one we featured in our next episode. Well, if you like the story of the burned house, please let us know your thoughts in the comments. We have more scary stories on the way, so be sure to subscribe our channel and stay with us. Thank you all for being here with us today. We will meet you again in the next episode. Until, stay haunted, stay terrified.
Feel the echoes of the spiritual universe.